are a light, a city on a hill. And Toby connected it to Isaiah, where in Isaiah 9, you have this idea of David as this light. And then that light, through the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah 52, that light is kind of transferred to the suffering servant, or Jesus. And then in Isaiah 58, you actually have this idea of the light being transferred to the followers of Jesus, or the believers. And then as they're transformed, they are lighted and pass this light out to the rest of the world. And then Jesus is essentially offering this same mission, the same idea to the rest of the listeners here at the Sermon on the Mount. You are the light, and your objective is to spread that light. But he's adding a little bit of clarity and definition to that through the course of the Sermon on the Mount in how they should live, how they should act. And then Jesus clarifies his relationship to the Old Testament with what he's saying. He's about to say a lot of things, and what he wants to clarify and what he's saying is that he's not here to do away with the law. But essentially that the people of Israel could never live up to the standard of the law. Jesus came to fulfill it through his death and resurrection. But at the same time, the law would never be irrelevant, will never be irrelevant to the people of God as a divine covenant that he made with them. And essentially it functions as wisdom, and it helps us to live faithfully, not as a set of binding rules on believers. And you'll see that a little bit as we get into this next section, kind of how Jesus takes that and goes a step further. So I got a lot of ideas, as with Toby and Melvin. I got a lot of ideas from the Bible Project, and so I want to state that up front because not all of these ideas are mine. And so Matthew 5:21 through 48, I'm not going to read it up front. We'll go in and read it in a little bit here. But I want to point out some things before we go into the actual text. So you're probably familiar with these 6 statements that Jesus makes. They're typically called the 6 antitheses or antithesis. Essentially, he says, "You have heard that it was said, but I say to you," some form of that. He might not actually say those words in every statement, but something similar to that as he goes through. And he's essentially taking parts of the law, so statements from the law or the 10 Commandments, and he is revealing the hidden wisdom underneath these laws. Essentially, you couldn't fulfill the purpose of these laws, but here is what I'm calling you to. Here's what the original intent of these laws was, and here's how I'm going to help you understand and fulfill these. And Jesus was also using this to highlight the trap of being legalistic about the law. Essentially, as an oral tradition, a lot of these people would have sat under the teaching of the law. They would have heard these things, and it would be really easy, as it is for us now, to take laws or rules and live strictly by those and not pay attention to how our heart is responding to those laws and how we're living, how our heart posture is in response to those. And one key point that I want to keep in mind as we go through these 6 statements, we're going to cover 3 today. So we're going to cover murder, lust, and divorce today. And then there's 3 additional ones that are oaths, retaliation, and enemy love. Today we're going to cover the first 3. Obviously, each of these is something that you could preach a whole sermon series on. We're not going to go to that level of depth, but we want to try and get some key points, some high-level definitions, and I definitely encourage you to study into each one of these individually, because I do think that all 6 of these have very important information that Jesus is wanting to highlight that he's going to go into again in other ways in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. So the one key point I want to highlight is that God defines righteousness or right acting as recognition of his image in others. So this is kind of the key point of these first three. So keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have you, if you want to pull up the passages in your Bible, so Matthew 5:21 through 48. And what we're going to do before I go into each of the individual sections is just take a look at all six. And the question I want you to discuss and ask each other is, why do you think Jesus picked these six to highlight as to bring out and highlight this differentiation between the law and the new covenant? Why these six? What do you think the significance of those was? And we'll discuss it for a few minutes here, and then we'll come back and I'll ask for you guys to share your insights or feedback. So you can turn to your neighbors and discuss that now. So I'll give you about a minute yet to finish wrapping up your conversations, and then we'll come back together. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up and come back together. And I'll just open it up for anybody to share their thoughts on this question. Why do you think these 6 are significant to the Sermon on the Mount? Why do you think Jesus chose these? And if you have other related answers or questions, please feel free to share those as well. Yeah.
Formulated question.
Mm-hmm.
Are these things important to work on and be like a healthy spot so that we can go to the next part? We're talking about giving,
Yeah, that's a good question. Mm-hmm.
And then this is, like, these are examples of him fulfilling or completing or coming to the heart of what the law is about. So his summary of the law is loving God and loving others and loving himself well. And then it seems like all of these are love related, or like how basically relationships, like you said at the beginning, relationships related to like how we all of them are, they're not just like a personal thing, they're all somehow connected to how we relate to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's similar to what Toby was talking about last week when he said that all of it is connected to, goes back to love, like you said.
All of these issues are messy,
Yeah.
and it's hard to pin down motivations of the heart, and I think that maybe that's what Christ is pushing us toward.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Jeremiah, where he writes and says, the law will not be written in stone.
Yeah. Yeah. They are messy, and it goes from one to another. It's like murder, lust, and then divorce. None of them are easy. And obviously all of them have very widely varying opinions on them.
It almost seems like he's also saying, like, well, when you think of murdering somebody, you're like, well, of course I won't murder somebody. But he's taking a step further and says, well, if you're even angry with somebody, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think to me, it's kind of like the adult. Well, I wouldn't go adultery, but why did I look at another woman and lust that? Seems he's like getting us to do a little bit more. Hey, up your game a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm curious how these 12 accentuate this. Which one's missing here? Which,
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like some of them connect and some of them may not connect. Some of them are maybe getting at a combination of them and like taking it a step farther and then offering some advice for what he's about to say in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, but that's a good question. Any other thoughts before we move into the text? I think when I've always thought of this, I've always kind of felt like they were 6 completely random things. Especially in the second section when you get into talking about oaths and going the extra mile. I think those things are thrown around, and I don't know that I understand them fully. But in some ways they feel random. And yet I think he's trying to pinpoint something really important here that we'll get into. So let's just hop right into the first section of text. I'll read it, and then I'll share a few high-level thoughts, and then I'll open it up for questions, discussion. So you can see in bold, I highlighted the kind of, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you. And these are the two key statements. And then he says a lot of other things which correlate to or support his argument. So you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, but whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. So I think what Jesus is highlighting here is essentially the idea that they knew murder was wrong from the law. This is directly from the Ten Commandments, a direct quote. And yet, what Jesus is pointing out is that even anger at its root is taking the image of God in another person and devaluing it to the point that it becomes an object, essentially, for you to destroy. And murder is the ultimate representation of that, where we're willing to take someone's life. We don't value their life enough to spare them, essentially. We take that life because we don't associate any value with it. And what Jesus is pointing out is that with anger, it's the same thing. We're essentially devaluing this person as an image bearer of God by allowing ourselves to be angry with this person, for insulting them, for name calling, belittling. Those things are things that don't treat another human with dignity that they deserve as an image bearer. And I think the two examples that he gives after this are also really key to his argument, in that the idea of leaving your gift at the altar, I've always wondered what exactly this means. Like, what is the significance of this? And I think essentially what he's pointing out is that broken relationships with fellow men cause a broken relationship with God. They cause a disconnection in our relationship with God. And what he's highlighting is that in order for us to worship God, we also need to have right relationships with others. And so if we have those fissures or those ruptures in our human relationships, we need to repair those so that we can have a right relationship with God. And then the last one, I think, is still a bit fuzzy in my mind, and I would love your guys' input on it. But I think essentially what it is the scenario that he lays out is one where most likely the person that's being accused hadn't known prior that they were in the wrong, and then all of a sudden it's brought to their attention, and it's not brought to their attention in a face-to-face kind of way, but like in a I'm taking you to court kind of way. And maybe it's a surprise, and you could think about all the feelings you would probably feel in that moment of defensiveness, wanting to defend yourself. And yet Jesus is saying that we should be quick to reconcile, not only for the sake of that relationship and repairing it, but also because even the civil punishment for not reconciling is a harsh one. It's a long one. So I'll open it up. What thoughts do you guys have on this section? What do you think Jesus is trying to highlight? And what do you think of those examples? Are they examples? Is he trying to say something else? What are your thoughts?
There's kind of this progression it's not about saying those exact words.
Yeah.
It's about the contempt that comes with that. And to take it beyond anger at somebody, which I'm not often angry at people, but I often find myself looking down on other people with some level of kind of like contempt
Mm-hmm.
or care less than in some way because of something they've done, some way that they treated me, or somehow they haven't matched up to my expectations or whatever. And that contempt is, the punishment for that contempt is actually almost more radical or harsher than the punishment for the anger
Mm-hmm.
in Jesus' words here. And that really hit me and convicted me when I kind of realized like contempt is part of what Jesus is getting at here.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it kind of ties into that, just like looking at another person and not treating them with the same dignity that they deserve in your mind, as Jesus is calling people to. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it is one of the first questions that comes up a lot of times when we look at a passage like this, because even Jesus in the temple got angry and threw some tables around, and I think there is a clear difference in Scripture between unrighteous and righteous anger. And sometimes maybe the lines are a little blurry on what is what, but I do think anger against injustice, unrighteousness, and sin are things that are part of that righteous anger definition. And I think that God wants us to feel that the anger against injustice, unrighteousness, and sin. So that's a good question. Okay, I think we'll go to the next, and obviously, like I said, I'm not scratching the surface of the depth of meaning that are in each of these sections, but I hope that it can give you an idea of where to start and that you can go and look at it for yourselves. So, lust. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. So one thing I want to highlight here, so obviously Jesus is doing the same thing where he's taking this adultery clearly from the Ten Commandments, a direct quote, and he's saying, you have heard this about adultery. Well, I say that even those who look at a woman with lustful intent have already committed adultery in their heart. And I think something that's a helpful distinction here is, this is from a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount by Craig Keener, is that the word looks here in the Greek is a present tense, and that often implies continuing action. So the looking is not just this, I guess the helpful distinction is that it's not a noticing of beauty per se, but it's this, how would you say, imbibing, consuming, kind of taking in something to use for our personal gratification out of a sexual intent or desire for sexual gratification for oneself. So I think that's a helpful definition because God did create beauty in humanity. and he created people in the image of God. So it's not that noticing of beauty, but it's that desire to consume as an object for one's self-gratification. And then another interesting thing is the idea of tearing out your eye or cutting off your hand. I think Jesus uses this really intense language as a way to point out just the gravity of this action. And also in, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth idea, where a lot of justice in the terms of the law was this balance weight of like, you have to have equal measures on both sides. And yet Jesus is saying that, and this is, now I'm losing my train of thought. Essentially, it's so important and significant that we would be willing to take out our own to kind of satisfy this injustice. Like that would be the reward of it, not the reward, the consequence of it. So I don't know if that makes sense, but what are your thoughts on this this section? What stands out to you? Because I know people take that, and I sometimes they take that cut off the hand language, cut out the right eye, and I think they take it and they associate it with very practical language of like, get rid of your smartphone, other things like that. And while I think that can be helpful, it's this, the core idea here is just the gravity of this. This is really, really important to God, that we value other human beings with the dignity that they deserve as an image bearer of God.
Is there any connection to his talking about eyes? There's other scriptures that talk about having a good eye.
Yeah.
Being generosity, whereas here it's talking about this eye as in taking self. Is there a connection there?
It's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but it seems like it would be a good connection. And we'll talk about that later in the Sermon on the Mount. The concept of seeing, or your worldview, how you perceive the world around you, is really important to Jesus. So yeah, eyes and hands. And I think too, there's a significant connection to how Jesus talks about being the hands and feet, essentially using our bodies to do righteousness. And so each of the members of our body is important in helping us fulfill that mission of doing right in the world, being on mission for God. Any other?
I just think it's a really, he uses really strong language, but there's another passage that I'm a little fuzzy exactly where it is, but it says that we shouldn't make provisions for our flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. That's in a nutshell what this is saying.
Yeah.
So it could be the smartphone, it can be a million other things.
Yep.
Remove ourselves from the way of known temptations.
Yeah.
There's also kind of this idea of like, almost like amputation, where it's like, if this member of your body is bringing some kind of corruption into your body, it's going to destroy your whole body. It's going to destroy your whole being.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's better to amputate it, to get rid of it, to get the disease out of the body before it spreads into the rest of the body.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yep. Mm-hmm.
it takes to not let that process start
Yeah.
and lead eventually to these things. That's why, what you said earlier, he's placing so much emphasis on
Yeah. That's a good point. Just starting small and turning into something larger, I think, is at the heart of what he's trying to get to with all of these things. In the last section, I'm probably going to spend the least time on this of all of them, even though it's a subject of much debate and there's a lot to talk about. There's honestly not a lot said in this section of scripture. It doesn't give a lot of clarity. So I'll read it. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So I think what Jesus is directly addressing in the time is that there was a lot of debate among Torah scholars as to what those specific provisions for divorce were in the law. And there was a camp of people who basically said that divorce could be for any number of reasons, even to the point that they would say, if you're unhappy in your marriage, that would be a reason for divorce. And there was another camp of people who said that sexual immorality was the only grounds for divorce. And so Jesus is kind of siding with that group of people. And I think essentially what he's getting at is that technically following the letter of the law, there was a lot of opportunity for abuse and misrepresentation of these laws in the treatment of women, and how, because the man was the one who could initiate the divorce in the Old Testament setting. And there was a lot of opportunity for abuse of these laws in the Old Testament time. And I think what Jesus is trying to point out is similar to the other ones, in that he's trying to highlight that the dignity of humans, that the fact that all humans are created in the image of God, is significant, and we need to value that. And I think that ties in here. And there's more to be said about this in terms of marriage covenants and all those sorts of things. So when you read this passage, I'm curious what goes through your mind. What are your thoughts, questions? And we'll just quickly cover this. We won't get into it in depth. But what do you think of when you read this passage? What are your thoughts, questions?
What does he mean by in 32 makes her commit adultery?
It's a good question.
Me, when I read this passage, I often think about how our sin can affect other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I've wrestled with and wondered, like, what did God really mean by this? I look at my mom and I say, well, she became a single mom because of my dad's sin, but then they're saying she can't get remarried because whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. It's like, what feels kind of sad is she has to be alone
Yeah.
for the rest of her life because of the sin that was committed by somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read this, that's where my mind goes. And
Yeah.
I'm often just reminded that my sin not just affects me, but it affects people around me, and especially those closest to me.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of thoughts, but
No, I think
that's where my mind goes.
it's significant, and it is a messy subject because we're dealing with humans here, and humans have hard stories, and humans experience difficult circumstances, and we have a lot of emotions tied up in those circumstances, and it makes it messy, it makes it difficult, and I don't think it's supposed to be easy.
I think the cultural difference comes out here when we look at this. We're thinking of our culture and the way the
Yeah.
It was making provision for them, and then Jesus comes along, and it feels like he is focusing a little bit more on the men and
Mm-hmm.
not being able to divorce all of them just for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I think he's calling back to the just the beautiful picture of marriage that was established from the beginning of time, and what the marriage covenant actually was supposed to be in a beautiful relationship between two people that connected them. So probably won't get into much more of that today, but it is obviously a topic that I believe warrants study, and it is something that Jesus considered important enough to include in these 6 points that he highlighted here in the Sermon on the Mount. So yeah, just to wrap up, it's important. Jesus is not abolishing the law. He's essentially taking it, he's revealing the wisdom underneath it, and also raising the bar for Christians going forward. Kind of like what multiple people have said, it's these small heart issues that then start becoming bigger and bigger and grow into something that becomes catastrophic to the Christian. And so it's about the heart. It's about getting to the core of the human, and he's essentially requiring us to search our hearts on a regular basis, to know what's there, to know what's going on with our emotions, to know what's going on with how we relate to others. What are the thoughts that we think towards others? Are we dignifying them as image bearers, or are we neglecting to, are we turning them into objects? So I think the key point that I want to highlight is God defines righteousness as the recognition of his image in others. And I think it really ties into all 3 of these pieces. And obviously there's more to each of these, but I think this is key to Jesus' point here, is that his image is in each human. And as we go about relating to other humans in this world, that is at the core of what it means to be a Christian, is to love other people. Like Melvin mentioned, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So I think that's key here. And I think that's where I'll close out. But next week, we'll talk about O's retaliation and enemy love. Obviously, we went through a lot of things today, and you may disagree, and I would welcome you to talk to me. I welcome that at any point, and I hope that this can be a discussion ongoing for us as a church as we think about what it means to be Christians living out the new covenant in the modern day. So thank you.